All right, I'm going to start by reading from Isaiah chapter 2. It's called, I don't have it up on the screen there, it's called The Lord's Future Reign. If you've got your Bibles there, open to Isaiah 2. Otherwise, listen carefully. This is a vision that Isaiah, son of Amos, saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. In the last days, the mountain of the Lord's house will be the highest of all, the most important place on earth. It'll be raised above other hills, and the people from all over the world will stream there to worship. People from many nations will come and say, "Come, let us go to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of Jacob's God. There he will teach us his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For the Lord's teaching will go out from Zion. His word will go out from Jerusalem. The Lord will mediate between nations, and will settle international disputes. They will hammer their swords into plowshares, and the spears into pruning hooks. Nation will no longer fight against nation, nor train for war anymore. Come, descendants of Jacob, let us walk in the light of the Lord. For the Lord has rejected his people, the descendants of Jacob, because they have filled their land with practices from the east, with sorcerers as the Philistines do. They have made alliances with pagans, and Israel is full of silver and gold. There's no end to its treasures. Their land is full of war horses. There's no end to its chariots. The land is full of idols. The people worship things they have made with their own hands. So now they will be humbled, and all will be brought low. Do not forgive them. Crawl into caves in the rocks, hide in the dust from the terror of the Lord and the glory of his majesty. Human pride will be brought down, and human arrogance will be humbled. Only the Lord will be exalted on that day of judgment, for the Lord of heaven's armies has a day of reckoning. He will punish the proud and mighty. He will bring down everything that is exalted. He will cut down the tall cedars of Lebanon and the mighty oaks of Bashan. He will level the high mountains and the lofty hills. He will break down every high tower and every fortified wall. He will destroy the great trading ships and every magnificent vessel. Human pride will be humbled, and human arrogance will be brought down. Only the Lord will be exalted on that day of judgment. Idols will completely disappear. When the Lord rises to shake the earth, his enemies will crawl in holes in the ground. They will hide in caves in the rocks from the terror of the Lord and the glory of his majesty. On that day of judgment, they will abandon the gold and silver idols they made for themselves to worship. They will leave their gods to the rodents and the bats, while they crawl away into caverns and hide among the jagged rocks in the cliffs. They will try to escape the terror of the Lord and the glory of his majesty as he rises to shake the earth. Last verse. Do not put your trust in mere humans. They are as frail as breath. What good are they? Need a drink after that. Doesn't it sound like an exciting time? The day of the Lord. Last week we were talking about how our lives are really the story of us. God's given us a beginning, obviously, the day we were born. A new story's just started over here in Luke's arms. He's also given us an end. And he's also given us an opportunity to have our climactic scene, that the last scene where everything's all falls into place, when he says to us, and we're standing in his presence, "Well done, good and faithful servant." However, he lets the middle part be chosen by us. So the question we asked last week is, what is your story going to say? Are you going to be the hero of your story? Is it going to be a story that others will learn about or read about long after you're gone? Or will it be a story that no one would actually want to watch twice? It's up to us. And that's one of the exciting things about a relationship with God, is he gives us so much freedom, but can point us towards a story of greatness and excitement and adventure. This week's message, we're talking about an encounter with God and the way that it reduces the pride of the human, us. Whether by a personal encounter or whether it's on the day of the Lord, Those who rely on themselves, their possessions, or even perhaps their position will soon realize their mistake in denying God his rightful place in their lives. Now, I've heard people say to me as I've talked to them about meaning of life or whatever, that some guys I used to work with would say, oh, well, I'm here for a good time, not a long time, so I'm not really worried about what happens afterwards. I just got to make the most of now. But to me, that just seems crazy. I wonder if an encounter with God, a genuine meeting face-to-face with the God of the universe, could they still say that statement, that I'm not worried about anything else? Could they say the same thing if they had an encounter with God, like some of the people, some of the heroes in the Bible did, like Moses and Paul and these other guys that fell on their face before God? Now, have you seen, there's heaps of movies when we start to think about it, but I've seen a movie where there's a prince or maybe a sergeant of an army, and he's just one mean dude. He's as harsh as they come. He's really unjust, one of those terms. They're never any good at that type of grammar. All those under him, he lorded it over them with an iron fist, and people trembled when he entered the room, and he really soaked up that position. The pride and the arrogance in this man, and maybe you can think of some of the stories. Star Wars we talked about last week. There's all these different ranks of bad guys. Like Darth Vader, you think he's the most awesome bad guy there is. Everyone's in fear, and if you look sideways at him, he'll be sabred or whatever. But then, does anyone know the guy above him? Yeah? The Emperor, that's right. As soon as the Emperor entered the room, Darth Vader was a groveling little pussycat pretty much because of the position. As soon as the king or the general or the one who outranks that person enters the scene and puts the unjust leader in his place, humbling them and even punishing them for the dishonor they brought to the kingdom, that pride and arrogance disappears real quick. The same happens in workplaces, and I've worked in several places where this same thing's happened. And it's on that show, what's it called? The Undercover Boss. You know how the CEO or the owner of the company will get in civilians' clothing or the workers' clothing, apply for a job, it seems like. They give himself the job and the position, and they slot into this spot at work on the factory floor or on the mailroom or wherever these guys that are fairly low ranking on the ladder work. He works alongside them and he sees how they're working. And sometimes the leading hand or the foreman is just a rogue within that workplace, and the owners had no idea. And what happens when it's all revealed that the boss has been working alongside this guy and caught him out in some horrible atrocities of his position? All that pride and arrogance of that leading hand disappears real quick, doesn't it? Because he's totally been outranked. He's been caught out. Same sort of thing would happen where I used to work at a shed business, and the manager, he was just a tough guy, and he'd ride you, was what we'd call it. Probably not the best term to be using, but he'd always be micromanaging you. You'd always be fearful you were going to do something wrong, and he would talk really gruff and tough and whatever. And then what happens when the owner came, who was the boss above him? I'd never seen a more wussy bloke on the planet. And it's just the way it was. He was totally outranked. And the pride and the arrogance that he had when it was just him and I disappeared. There will come a day when all men will gain an accurate perspective of who is really in charge. And the passage we've just read gives a little bit of a glimpse of that. Now, Isaiah was written probably about 600 years before Christ. And it's helpful to understand that we believe there's possibly a threefold fulfillment of a lot of the prophecies in Isaiah. The first in this case will be the immediate fulfillment within the next few or perhaps couple or few hundred years of when it was written. And it could be talking about when the Babylonians conquered Israel. In fact, the story of the Israelites is a recurring tale of God's provision in the first place, resulting in the pride of people and their downfall and then being forced to turn back to God as they hit the bottom of the well. The warning comes from verse 5, where it explains that Israel has every luxury known to man, yet they've forgotten once again the source of all their good things, and they've adopted the practices of their pagan neighbours and now trust in their wealth to protect them. They're no longer trusting God for looking after them. They've set themselves up with all this stuff, armies, gold, treasures, chariots, and they forget about God. It says from verse 5, "Come, descendants of Jacob, let us walk in the light of the Lord. For the Lord has rejected his people, the descendants of Jacob. They have filled their land with practices from the east, with sorcerers, as the Philistines do. They've made alliances with pagans." And then it talks about all the stuff they've accumulated from verse 7. Israel is full of silver and gold. There is no end to its treasures. Their land is full of war horses. There's no end to its chariots. Their land is full of idols, and the people worship the things they've made with their own hands. So now what will happen? They will all be humbled. They will all be brought low. Do not forgive them. God cannot let their sins go unchecked, because it will lead to their ultimate destruction. He humbles the people and brings them back to himself. Often he used another nation, like the Chaldeans or the Babylonians are the same people, and just totally wiped them out or conquered them. They went into slavery or exile, and they were forced to turn back to God. And they realized through the prophets like Isaiah what they had done. They'd just totally forgotten about all the guidelines that God showed them to live, and were trusting in everything else to look after them. So there may well be a second part of this prophecy, or part of the message in the prophecy, and that is for us as a church in the 21st century. If we read from verse 11, just listen to this for a minute. I know you've listened to it already, but imagine this is a message to us here in Glasshouse, and it may sound a little different or hit home a bit more. How does this make you feel when God says this? "Human pride will be brought down, and human arrogance will be humbled. Only the Lord will be exalted on the day of judgment. For the Lord of heaven's armies has a day of reckoning. He will punish the proud and mighty and bring everything that is exalted down. He will cut down the tall cedars of Lebanon, the oaks of Bashan, level the high mountains and lofty hills, break down every high tower and fortified wall, destroy all the trading ships, the magnificent vessels. Human pride will be humbled, and human arrogance will be brought down. Idols will completely disappear when the Lord rises to shake the earth, and his enemies will crawl into holes in the ground." It goes on talking about that, hiding in caves, hiding in the jagged rocks. On the day of the Lord, you just can't hide from God when he wants to be known. "Don't put your trust in mere humans, they are as frail as breath. What good are they?" Now, we've talked about this a heap of times before. We all know it's not wrong to have wealth, but it's a constant battle for us when we continually gain things or gain material possessions that we're proud of, not to elevate them above where they should be. Sometimes they can become the very thing that we rely upon for our lives, instead of us speaking to God every day about our needs. We start to look for, how am I going to get money, or what am I going to do in this situation, without consulting God at all. It's so easily done. And for us at the moment at home, Melissa and I, Kylie saw it, we left the garage door open. There's a whole bay of our carport. My Hilux is not going to sit out in the weather for this hobby, so it still fits in there, but only just. There's cupboards and timber beds and nice carved cabinet things and coffee tables and rocking chairs. And what we've discovered, or Melissa stumbled upon, is that some of the things on eBay, or now we're into this Gumtree website, are really cheap. Like, yeah, that's cool. What are you going to do with a heap of that furniture? But if you put a bit of white paint on some of this, sometimes you do the rustic, shabby chic look, paint it all up and rub back the corners, and flog it with chains or catch it on fire or whatever, get creative with it so it looks like it's 200 years old and it's not really. Or sometimes leave it totally white and bog up all the cracks and make it look really schmick, which is Queen Anne style, I'm learning. Now they're the ones with the round, curvy feet and the scrolled edges and whatever. Or sometimes you want it to be the country look, where you have some white and some timber, and you can even use olive oil to stain it. All this. Anyway, what am I talking about this for? Melissa bought a cupboard, I don't know if I told you, $20 from a garage sale, and twice it went on eBay for $400. And we're like, yes! The first time this happened, we were like, thank you, God, you've shown us a creative way that's minimum effort that we can make a bit of money. So we go and do another one, we go and buy another thing, and we make a couple of $100 on it by a coat of paint, whatever. Soon, you start to be on the internet every spare minute. Oh, look at that one. Oh, look at this. Soon, you're as a family in the ute driving around Brisbane all day with the kids screaming in the back of the car, promising them Maccas by the end of the day if they just keep quiet for another couple of hours while we're picking up all this junk to sell on again. And it's so easily done that our lives have just been turned upside down by what started out as a really good thing, as making a bit of extra money, can easily consume you when you lose your perspective of where God has to be in that part of your life. Suddenly your thoughts change from thanking God for the blessing it is to have this extra cash or a hobby that can actually make some money instead of costing money through this avenue, but it turns into the next item we need, or we'll not have enough. Oh, I can't miss out. You stress out about, we've got to put a bid on that right now, and it turns into a big mess. Now, we may not have idols all over our homes like we've just read in this passage where Israel had statues of Baal and all these other Asherah poles, or however you say it, all these pagan things. They had a god for just about every aspect of life, and a carved idol or a golden idol representing that god for each one. And Israel would slip into that again and again because it just seemed to be working for the pagans and they're forgetting about God. We don't have a lot of that going on here in our own lives. However, how many things in our lives do we hold in idolatrous relationships instead of seeking God for all we need? This is something we need to be continuously reminded of. Sometimes God allows it to be taken away so we're reminded before it's too late. And that's certainly the idea in Israel's case. They'd get close to God, abundance, all the crops are going well, they've got everything they need, and they start making alliances with the neighbours, into marrying and adopting their cultures, and all of a sudden they've forgotten about God altogether, and it hits the fan, and they become slaves again. It's just recurring over and over again. And it's not unlike the story of us. We get blessed by God, we thank God, the church is running well, we've got great friends, we've got enough or even more than we need. And you start to get comfortable and you start to lax in your Bible reading. You start to, we're having such a good time, we really don't need to meet for prayer as a church, we don't really need to meet for Bible study, let's just go bowling instead, or whatever we like to do. And it slowly but surely drifts in a way that we've forgotten God altogether. Sometimes we get a wake-up call, might be a health scare or whatever, but it happens again and again. God reminds us before it's too late quite often. Now, I've shared this dream with you before. It probably wasn't that long ago, but some of you may not have been here, and it's something that's stuck with me. I don't know if you've had a dream that you genuinely realise was a message from God. It's probably only happened to me once or twice. I know Melissa's had a couple of dreams that she's shared, and they've definitely had a message for what we need to hear in that time. But it was early on in our marriage, been married 11 years now. Earlier on, we had so much. We had a fully renovated colonial house in Maryborough, and we wanted to do things. We wanted projects on the house, but there was nothing needed doing. So we built an attic in the roof, and we built a shed. And we both had 2 nice cars and 2 cool dogs and a motorbike and all that kind of stuff. But one night I had a dream, and forgive me if you've heard this already, but I sensed there was a storm coming, and behind the shed or behind the house was a lot of my treasured possessions. And they were kind of out in the weather. There was not enough room for them inside. So I've got them all huddled against the wall, kind of under the eaves of this roof, but it wasn't enough to cover it. And I'm like, oh, I've got to cover this before the storm. And I had one of those silly sollies $2 tarps, 6 by 6 or whatever. And I'm trying to stretch it out over this stuff, but it's nowhere near covering it. And the wind's starting to pick up, and the tarp's flapping up and folding over, and I'm starting to stress and fret that my stuff's going to get wrecked when this storm comes. And then the rumble is getting close behind me, and I turn back and I realise that the storm is actually a firestorm. The rolling clouds are flames and smoke, and utter destruction is on the way. Yet instead of being scared of this coming, I realised that this storm was actually God himself coming. And I was going to be okay because Jesus was going to snavel me out of that scene unharmed. However, everything that I'd worked so hard for and tried to protect was about to become ash real quick. And I woke up just with a whole new perspective, and I guess that's the encounter with God in that moment that I needed to realise that this is just silly, consuming my every waking moment with getting stuff to make my life better, when an encounter with God can change my perspective to make that just really means nothing to me. Being close to my God and my Creator and my Saviour, Lord Jesus Christ, is what life's about. Now obviously I've still got things that I like, and I drift back into that materialistic way of thinking. But again and again, there's little prompts that say, look, I think you're elevating this. You're working a bit too hard for stuff and not spending enough time with me or with your family, or your kids don't care how flash your car is really, as long as it's not going to break down out the back of Beerburrum, which the Volvo did once, and Will still asks us every time we get in the car, have we got enough fuel, Mum? But they don't really care. They were interested in where we're going, not how we're getting there. There's a third element to the prophecy talked about in this Isaiah chapter 2. The first is for them who it was immediately written for, the Israelites back before Christ. The second part perhaps is for us right now. There's something we can learn from this, keeping our perspective right and our eyes fixed on God. The third part is, of course, the part that hasn't been fulfilled in any way, or certainly not ultimately, is that last day that we're talking about, the day of the Lord. In the passage we just read, Isaiah shares a vision of what it will be like in the last days when the glory of God is revealed to humanity. There is fear, there is craziness. People are trying to hide, but it's like this firestorm coming. You can't hide from something that encompasses the whole earth. There's nowhere else to hide. But listen to this part in the first couple of verses. There's also something else going on here. In the last days, it says, the mountain of the Lord's house will be the highest of all, the most important place on earth. It will be raised above the other hills, and the people from all over the world will stream there to worship. Now, that doesn't sound like a scary part of what's going to be like at the end, but it's a part where we sing about it and we read about it. One day, every eye will see, every knee will bow, and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord and God is it, and he's worth serving, and anything else he put before him was just a waste of time and a lot of rubbish. But we can't do much except prepare ourselves for that day, but we can bring this part where it's talking about the mountain of God being the most important place on earth. we can bring that about on a smaller scale. At the moment, we see great superpowers of the world as being places that people want to be close to. If you've got the White House of America on your side, you'll have great protection. We look to the UN to bring peace among nations that are at war and try and bring justice to those places. But on the last day, these powerful governments will have nothing to offer anyone, because God is just going to show it all. He's going to show himself at the top of it all. But how good would it be for our little local church to be, like was described as Mount Zion, the most important place on earth for the people that were around it, where people are wanting to say, let's go to this place where we can connect with God and learn his ways and live the type of life that we're supposed to live. How good would it be for the local church to be the hub of the community, the most important place on earth for those around us? And it actually happens quite a lot in third world countries where the church is the hub of the community. It is the center of all activity, spiritual activity and guidance, but also it's the clinic. It's the place where you learn to read and write. And that's what it's like in the Songut village in Papua New Guinea, where we go each year. We're planning, our vision is for not just the church to be the center of their village, but the Songut village to be the center of the surrounding districts as the church influences that village. You know what I mean? So the influence spreads from there right throughout the province in that way. Now, I don't know why God doesn't appear to everyone the way he did to some people in the Bible. Like, God walked and talked, if you like, with Enoch and Adam, and even Moses saw him. He came down and his face was all shiny when he come down with the tablets. Peter and John, is it? Now you got me thinking. At the mountain of transfiguration with Jesus, they saw stuff that you just could never forget. And if you ever started to put possessions or pride in front of what you experienced there, you'd really need a good slap. But most of us haven't seen that. The Apostle Paul has one of the greatest testimonies. But what an awesome privilege he had, because he was totally going the other way. He was locking up and even seeing Christians executed for their faith as a Pharisee, one who was strictly abiding to the law of the Jews. But he met Jesus and was blinded for 3 days on the road to Damascus. You don't forget that. And he didn't forget that. From then on, his life was just totally the opposite end of the scale, where he was ultimately killed for his faith. But most of us don't get that. But when they did meet God, they fell flat on their faces and forgot about everything that was coming between them. What we have to do is know the truth and allow this encounter that we may have, as small as it is, whether it's a dream or when we just read something from the Bible and God speaks to us, take that encounter and use that as the time where you sit down and say, hang on, some of my perspectives are a bit skew if I'm going to move on with God being number one in my life. He's waiting for us to see him in his holiness and realign our perspective in his rightful place, him in his rightful place. The cool thing is, despite what many people think, is, God's up there with a big stick already and willing and excited to see who can squash next, which is some of how the Old Testament passages read when you first look at them. But he's not interested in humbling us. Sorry about that, my phone. He's not interested in humbling us, making us feel terrible and fall flat on our face, and then he stands over saying, yes, you will bow down to me. You are nothing and I am everything. Although that is the case, that's not what he's about. In fact, when we come to the point of being humbled in his presence, he doesn't leave us like that. In fact, he reaches down and lifts us up, and he wants us to share in the glory that he has. He wants us to be part of the awesome things that are going on because he's in control. We did a drama back in when we went to Sri Lanka, Melissa and I, before we were married, and I was represented Jesus. It was probably the only drama I did. We didn't speak. It was more a bit of a dancing act thing, and I don't know how I got roped into it, but it was actually quite effective because we were in a culture who couldn't understand English really well. And we had gloves, and I had white gloves, and I was God creating everything. Then I created Melissa out of the dust and then showed her everything really cool. And then I said, over here, that's where you don't want to go. That's just don't have anything to do with that. And I'd cross my arms in front of that. And we're looking around, we're having a good time with this other stuff. Slowly, these other couple of people in black, with black gloves on, came out and started drawing her towards the evil things. And there was all sorts of addictions and money and lust and all that. Ultimately, grab her out of my reach and suck her over there, and then the weight of all them crush her down into the dirt, and she's stuck. And they put these bands around her neck which hold her down to the ground. And then, if I get this right, I don't want to miss any out. Ultimately, I slip in somehow underneath that, remove the bands from her neck and put them on myself, and then the demons go, yes, this is what we're really about, because we have Jesus right where we want him. The Son of God is now in our hands, and they nail me to a cross just symbolically, and I'm dead, and the music goes doom and my head's down, and they're in the victorious position over me, and next thing, bang, my arms go flying back, the rings come off my shoulders, my white gloves are radiating under the ultraviolet light. Perhaps the demons have flown across the room. Melissa's creation still down on the floor in a big mess, and I come along conquering all that, lift up her chin, put the white gloves back on her hands, and the relationship's restored. It's a powerful message. We had a lot of the locals in tears just through that story of what God has done for creation and for humanity. But you can see that figure as I pictured it. This is what God loves to do. He lifts us up into the heavenly places once we've been humbled and recognized that he is God. He's not interested in lording it over us, even though he is God. He's created us out of nothing just by speaking. Once we've been humbled, he restores us to him, and he lifts us up to share in his glory. And perhaps next week we'll look at a whole nother aspect which is associated with this particular topic about how our perspectives change from being pride for 1 minute, meeting God and realizing that we're nothing, we've got everything all backwards. And it's the way we associate with other people. So much of our culture is so backwards to the way God's designed it. When we see the parables of Jesus lifting up the heads of those who are down and outs, the people no one else wanted to have anything to do with, it's a real challenge to us, because how much are we in a position of arrogance over the person who's struggling, maybe living across the road from you, maybe a single mother with addiction problems, or a drunk who just doesn't seem to have any friends, and we easily say, oh, well, I'm not going to have anything to do with them, because we associate us having it all together. We're living God's way, they're living the world's way, and we'll separate ourselves. But it's actually a position of arrogance that needs to be turned around on its head. Jesus did it. Just about every parable is a parable about the kingdom. It turns all that around. We might even look at that in more depths afterwards. But what I wanted to do, and I didn't bring any paper because I wasn't sure if we're going to have much time, but we've got heaps of time, is just ask yourself while we perhaps listen to this next song. The song's called I Can Only Imagine. Well, thanks for listening to my message on being humbled by an encounter with God. Check out my other messages on YouTube here, or our internet page and Facebook and all that stuff. Love to hear from you. Bless you. See you later.